All right, let's talk tariffs and coffee, because President Trump's newest round of tariffs could make your morning cup of coffee more expensive.
Brazil, the largest supplier of coffee to the United States, its exports now face a 50% tariff into America.
For most Americans, coffee is a daily necessity. The U.S. consumes between 450 and 560 million cups every day, and about one-third of that comes from Brazil. In 2024 alone, Brazil shipped more than 8 million 60-kilogram bags, worth around $1.9 billion. For decades, those beans entered duty-free. That has now changed. President Trump's new tariffs impose a 50% tax on Brazilian coffee. A 50-pound bag that cost $147 now lands at nearly $360. Prices are projected to climb 15 to 20%, pushing a $16 pound into the 20s. This shock raises a central question. If Brazil reduces exports to the U.S. and turns toward Canada, what challenges will America face, and what opportunities will Canada seize?
Against all odds, 100% American-grown coffee.
We have multiple canyons where we grow coffee.
A drop in the bucket, Omar, because again, it's only 1% of coffee consumed in the United States that's produced here.
You would think it would be a great opportunity for all American beans, but other nations can deliver a product just as good for a fraction of the cost.
The American coffee sector is enormous. According to the National Coffee Association, it supports 2.2 million jobs and contributes $343 billion annually to the economy. Losing a supply stream worth $1.9 billion from Brazil threatens more than importers. It threatens an entire chain of employment. For companies on the ground, the math is brutal. A bag that once cost under $150 now costs more than double. Industry estimates suggest every cup could climb by another 20 to 25 cents within just a few months. Consumers already paid 15% more for roasted coffee in mid-2025 compared with a year earlier. Demand, however, is unyielding. People may switch brands or blends, but they rarely stop drinking. That is why the supply shock is so severe. Brazil is not the only source under pressure. Switzerland, a major exporter of roasted coffee to the U.S., also faces higher tariffs. With two leading suppliers hit at once, the American market risks both price inflation and genuine shortage. What happens if Brazil, faced with a 50% tariff in the U.S., decides to divert more of its beans to Canada instead? While the U.S. raises barriers, Canada has kept its doors open. Brazilian coffee enters Canada at a zero tariff. In the first half of 2025, Brazil's exports to Canada increased by 25% to a record level, with coffee among the country's key export items. For Brazil, the logic is straightforward. If the American market is blocked, Canada becomes a natural alternative. For Canada, the benefits are immediate. Importers gain access to beans at stable prices. Domestic consumers face less inflationary pressure. Canada strengthens its position as a reliable partner for the world's top coffee exporter. This diversion of trade is not symbolic. It means beans that once arrived at U.S. ports are now redirected into Canadian supply chains. That shift could alter the balance of coffee trade in North America for years to come. If Brazil decides to prioritize Canada, the U.S. risks losing its status as the #1 buyer. Supply contracts and logistics, once moved, are not easily reversed. Even a 10% contraction in the industry could represent tens of billions in lost value across jobs, retail, and hospitality. Canada, meanwhile, emerges as a confident counterweight. By maintaining zero tariffs, it positions itself as the North American hub for Brazilian coffee. What began as a reaction to U.S. policy may become a lasting structural change. Trump's tariffs were meant to project strength, but coffee is not an industry America can replace at home. By pricing Brazilian beans out of the market, Washington may have handed its neighbor a lasting advantage. And that morning cup, once a simple routine, now reflects the far-reaching consequences of trade policy on everyday life.
Setting a tariff for essentially the rest of the world, and that's what they're going to pay if they want to do business in the United States.
What happened to 90 trade deals in 90 days?
We've spoken to everybody. We know it's all done.
I think with Vietnam, the UK, with China, not all those are intended to be final deals either.
At the start of August, President Donald Trump declared victory. His global tariff campaign forced allies into quick agreements before his deadline. The promise was stability, with tariff caps around 15% in exchange for huge investment pledges in the United States. On paper, it looked like a win. In practice, details remain vague, and industries in partner countries still feel the strain. Washington's message is simple: invest big or face higher tariffs. That has left allies from Europe to Asia weighing short-term relief against the burden of massive commitments and the risk that Trump could change course again.
Japan's auto sector shows the limits of these deals. The World Trade Organization reported that the average U.S. tariff rate now exceeds 20%, the highest in more than a century. For Japanese car makers, this is a real cost.
Short term, we have to brace for the impact. We work hard to find a way to overcome these incremental costs.
Mazda expects almost $1 billion in extra expenses this year. To cope, it is ramping up output at a $2 billion plant in Alabama, built during Trump's first term. That investment softens the blow, but half of Mazda's cars are still produced in Japan for the U.S. market. The company also relies heavily on a large factory in Mexico, which remains exposed until Washington finalizes terms with Mexico. The result is uncertainty, not stability. Europe's metal sector is in a similar bind.
Negotiations, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the framework trade agreement with the US will provide support for Europe's metal sector freight, but details remain in short supply.
Brussels reached a framework agreement with Washington, promising tariff cuts and a quota system. Yet steel and aluminum still face a punishing 50% duty. The quota system, which should allow some duty-free exports, is not yet defined. The European Steel Association says U.S. tariffs have already damaged an industry worth more than $90 billion a year and weakened by falling demand. Business leaders warn they remain in the dark with little more than promises to rely on. These examples show that rushing to sign has not removed the pressure.
Canada took another route. Ottawa refused to sign under pressure, accepting a 35% tariff on goods outside CUSMA as of August 1st. That sounds severe, but CUSMA continues to exempt the vast majority of Canadian trade. According to Scotiabank chief economist Jean-François Perrault, between 85 and 95% of exports remain tariff-free under the deal, when averaged, Canada's effective tariff rate is about 5 to 6%. That is painful, but still lower than the 15% rate faced by Europe, Japan, or South Korea. Although Canada has felt the pain of Trump's tariffs, the country is turning its focus inward. Rather than tying its future to Washington's demands, it is strengthening itself at home.
We've got a lot of work to do on major projects, on affordability, on security in our communities.
This was clear in the recent meeting between Prime Minister Mark Carney and Ontario Premier Doug Ford in Ottawa, where leaders emphasized building national competitiveness and resilience. Some Canadians question whether the government is being too passive in the face of Trump's tariffs, but the data suggests that Canada has avoided the most punishing outcomes while keeping leverage for future talks. Unlike partners that promised hundreds of billions in investments, Canada has not mortgaged its long-term position for short-term relief.
What the Prime Minister actually said during the election campaign. No deal is better than a bad deal. And so we're not going to be in a hurry to sign a bad deal.
The contrast is clear. Nations that rushed to sign before August 1st now face heavy investment costs and lingering uncertainty. Japan's car makers and Europe's steel industry show that the pain did not disappear after the agreements. Canada, by holding firm, absorbed targeted damage in specific industries, but kept the broader economy intact and its negotiating position alive. This is not surrender. It is a strategy of endurance. With energy exports, critical minerals, and an integrated supply chain, Canada remains a partner the United States cannot easily replace. Trump may continue to escalate, but Prime Minister Mark Carney's approach shows that strategic patience is the strongest counterweight to Washington's unpredictable demands.
Canada has been very tough to deal with over the years. We don't need them to make our cars, and they make a lot of them. We don't need their lumber because we have our own forests, et cetera, et cetera. We don't need their oil and gas. We have more than anybody.
I'm being honest, like no one knows what he wants, including elected officials down here.
In early August, Donald Trump escalated his tariff campaign. Canada was locked into a 35% duty for non-USMCA goods, while the EU, Japan, and South Korea accepted lower tariff caps in exchange for concessions. Switzerland was hit with 39% after talks failed, and Mexico secured a 90-day delay. But this isn't just about one country. Ottawa is under sustained pressure, and Beijing is advancing strategies that undercut U.S. leverage. Trump's tariffs have opened multiple fronts, and both Canada and China are responding in ways designed to outlast short-term shocks.
For a long time, Canada was happy to send its oil to the U.S.
Nearly all of Canada's oil is exported to its neighbor.
It seems not very exposed because it's the one thing the U.S. hasn't really put any tariffs on so far. I think they recognize they need our oil and gas to provide energy security for their country.
Under Prime Minister Mark Carney, Canada has refused to rush into a bad deal. Instead, it is reinforcing links with Mexico, diversifying export destinations, and protecting domestic industries from sudden disruption. One of its strongest cards is energy. The United States depends on millions of barrels of Canadian oil and gas each day for energy security. Imposing tariffs on that flow would raise U.S. consumer prices, a cost Washington is unlikely to risk. This interdependence allows Canada to absorb tariff pressure while building alternative markets, rather than bending to Washington's timeline.
The impression we get, certainly, is that Trump's leverage with China is much less.
Well, China is reportedly tightening its grip on critical minerals it supplies to Western defense companies. According to a Wall Street Journal report, Beijing's control over rare earths is delaying production and driving up the cost of key materials used to make weapons, jets, and drones.
Beijing's pushback is targeting the very supply chains that U.S. tariffs cannot reach. On the industrial side, China controls roughly 60 to 70% of global rare earth mining and close to 90% of refining. Since late 2024, it has tightened export rules for minerals essential to defense manufacturing, from high-temperature magnets for jet engines to specialty alloys, making these materials harder and more expensive for U.S. contractors to source.
China has pulled off something of a magic trick when it comes to oil independence. It's estimated more than a fifth of China's oil imports last year was sanctioned oil.
On the energy front, China has been dismantling one of its biggest vulnerabilities: reliance on seaborne oil imports that pass through the U.S.-monitored Malacca Strait. By expanding renewable power generation, building the world's largest electric vehicle industry, and adding to its strategic oil reserves, Beijing is reducing the leverage that U.S. naval power once held. It has also turned sanctioned oil into a tool of resilience. In 2024, China brought in about 821,000 barrels per day from Russia, 1.4 million from Iran, and roughly 268,000 from Venezuela, all under U.S. sanctions. Much of this crude is processed by smaller teapot refineries, which then sell refined products across Asia. This approach keeps feedstock costs low, supports domestic refining capacity, and weakens the intended bite of U.S. sanctions. Together, these moves give China more room to maneuver in a trade confrontation, restricting what America needs while securing what China itself cannot afford to lose. Trump's intent is clear: make resisting U.S. terms more expensive than conceding. Yet both Canada and China are using asymmetric responses. Canada leans on its role as a critical energy supplier. China makes essential inputs scarcer and cuts its exposure to American pressure points. Neither is matching tariff for tariff. Both are targeting U.S. vulnerabilities that tariffs cannot fix. The result? Rising costs inside the United States, from defense materials to industrial components, with no quick resolution in sight. Trump is chasing rapid, visible wins, agreements he can showcase as proof of American strength. Carney's approach is defensive patience. Maintain negotiating channels, protect Canada's structural advantages, and avoid locking in concessions that could collapse within months. Xi Jinping's strategy is slower still, reshaping industries and supply chains to make the next trade conflict less damaging for China. This contest is no longer about headline tariff rates. It is about which side can endure and adapt under pressure. Canada's energy leverage and trade diversification, China's control over critical minerals and its energy transition, are all designed to make U.S. economic coercion costlier over time. Trump's tariffs have reshaped the tone of global trade, but they have also triggered a coordinated pushback that will test America's ability to fight on multiple fronts without giving ground.